Hi, I'm Ashley from Crinkly Quilts. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do edge-to-edge quilting on your sewing and embroidery machine. I'll be using my HUSQVARNA Viking Designer Sapphire 85 and a 360 by 200 hoop for this project. There's a couple different types of designs you can do for edge-to-edge quilting. The first is a design that connects to another point on the design. So it's like a continuous design, and it takes a little bit of practice and a bit more skill, but the result is something like this. Now, in this video, we're going to be doing something a bit easier. We're going to be doing a design that fills the entire hoop, that doesn't need to connect to another point, but gives you a great meandery all over look. Now, if you wanted a more custom look, you could quilt your quilt in the hoop of your embroidery machine, doing it block specific, and there's lots of videos you can look up on that. But let's get started. Some materials you're going to want for this project are a nice big ruler. I like a 6 by 24 or 6.5 by 24 inch ruler. You'll also need a way to mark your quilt, whether that is a Hera marker or some kind of water soluble marker or pencil, something that's going to disappear and not leave a permanent mark on your quilt. First thing we're going to do is baste your quilt. For a project like this, I like to spray baste using a temporary spray adhesive that you can get at any quilt shop. Make sure to give yourself lots of extra backing all around the sides of your quilt. That way, if you have to do a hoop at the edge of your quilt, you're not going to run out of fabric. Make sure everything is nice and flat and you are ready to go. The next thing we're going to do is create a template for our quilting. Use a piece of mesh stabilizer or white fabric in your hoop and stitch out the design exactly how it will look on your quilt. So I just took my mesh template, or is what I'm going to call it, out of the hoop. But before I did that, I marked where the center points are on the hoop, so that when I line it up on the next part, it's all done. So what you can do now is I'm going to use my template to make sure that my design is running off the edges of the quilt. So see how it's coming off of this side and a little bit down here. Okay, so I have a water soluble pencil and then my ruler. And what did I say? 2 inches up from this line. So I'm gonna mark I bumped the camera. This seam with the 2-inch line right here, and just go all the way across. So I have a nice visible line all the way across my quilt. Now I said 3 inches in from the edge of the quilt. So I have the edge of my quilt lined up with my 3-inch line, and I'm going to mark the line all the way up the quilt as well. So now we have our starting off point. So once when we get our quilt or our design on here, this is the bottom, this is the top. We line it up with our markings. This will be what stitches out in this area. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hoop this and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so I'm going to line up this vertical line with my top 2 markers on my hoop. And the same thing with the horizontal line right here. Now I'm going to loosen up my screw here because this is thick. It's got a layer of batting and 2 layers of fabric. It's not like a regular embroidery. So, get that underneath my tripod. I'm going to try my best to keep that lined up as I kind of squish it into this hoop. Okay, so this is the hard part. My line kind of veered off, so it's not really there. So I'm gonna see if I can loosen it even more. I can. Great, I'm loosening it a little more. We're gonna see if we can't fix it without having to undo the whole thing, which I did. There we go. So then I got it back in there. And that's pretty good. It's a little off right here, but the design is, I made this design in a way that it won't be obvious if the points don't line up or if your quilt isn't hooped perfectly. It's just a basic meander and it'll look great as an all-over design. So I'm gonna crank that knob, tighten this baby in place, and we're gonna let it stitch out on the machine. Okay, let's go. I'm gonna grab my top thread and press start. So I got my thread tails. It didn't start stitching right away. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back to stitch number 1. So we're going to go back to stitch 0, start, wait, no, remix. We're going to go back to stitch 1, stitch 2. There we go. All right, so I'm going to hold my 2 thread tails together. I am not going to cut them right now. I am going to knot and bury them after I am done with this section. So let's press start. So as it comes to the edge of the quilt, because I didn't like baste it down, I'm gonna keep a close eye on it and make sure as it goes off the edge and then back on that nothing gets flipped up. A remedy to this would be to just baste the edges of your quilt down with a longer stitch length, and that would, you wouldn't have to be so vigilant as your quilt is being quilted. There we have it. We are done with the first section, and now I will show you how to move on to the next section. All right, here is our first section all done. It looks great. Now I'm going to show you how I knot and bury these threads from the start. So I'm going to pull up the bobbin thread through to the top. I don't know if you saw how I did that, but I just used my seam ripper and pulled that bobbin thread up. I'm going to tie this into a double knot right here. And I'm going to take one of these needles that has this nice big loop on it. I'm going to stick it through my quilt sandwich, but only through the top layer. I don't want it to go all the way through the back. And then I'm going to pull those threads. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try and get you closer. Pull those threads through that loop. There we go. Through the loop. And then through just that top layer of the quilt. And then I'll just cut those threads. Alright, you can see here is the quilting from our first section. And then now I'm going to place our template, which goes like this along here. And I'm going to get it to where I like the stitches coming together, like the spacing between the stitches, which is right here. So this is where I'm gonna want this, which is, I'm gonna measure about 1 3/4 inches away. Let's do 2 inches. We'll do 2 inches away from this seam right here. So I'm going to mark that with my water-soluble marker or pen, pencil, whatever I have, all the way up and down the quilt. Okay, so that is now marked, and that is where I'm going to put my next hooping. So I have this new vertical line I made lined up with the top and bottom marker, and then this horizontal line we made from the first step lined up with my horizontal markers. So I'm going to get this hooped just like I did before, and we're going to start quilting it. All right, my second section is hooped and ready to go. I've pulled up my threads and I'm just gonna press start. Now you'll notice on the inside of this quilt that I have some stuff here. What I do is I like to just roll it up and just keep an eye on it. You gotta wanna be near your quilt while it's going across. But the bigger your quilt is, and the more you go across your quilt, the more fabric you're gonna have on the inside. So what I recommend using is, you can use clothespins for something that's thin like this. Chip clips, those like for your bag of chips, those work really well. And then you can use pins. So I'll use a pin right now. So I just have a little pin, and then you can just pin it together like that so that it stays together as you go across. Okay, my second section just finished quilting. I'm going to knot and bury my threads and do the exact same steps I did, marking another vertical line and re-hooping and keep quilting across until I get to the end of the quilt. And I will show you what we do when we move on to the next, like moving up on our quilt. I have gone from one edge of the quilt to the other for one section. I have all my vertical lines marked across the quilt, and now I'm going to move from one section up to the next section. So all I need to do now is just figure out my next horizontal line. Since all of my vertical lines are now marked, I just need to figure out my next horizontal line, and then I'll have where I need to hoop each section across this portion of the quilt. So I'm going to lay my template down again, mark or line this up with my vertical line, and then figure out how close I want it to my previous stitching. So you can leave it looser, you can get them closer together. I like it right here, so this is where I'm going to mark my next horizontal line across the quilt. So I'm going to do that right now, and then I'm going to hoop this section, quilt it, and then once this section is quilted, I already have my vertical line, my next vertical line, my horizontal line already marked, and I'm just going to hoop across my quilt and then just continue that process until the quilt is done. This section is done. So all I have to do now across the rest of this quilt is now using this new horizontal line, moving the hoop over to my previous vertical line and horizontal line where they intersect. And just keep going across until our quilt is done.
If your quilt is larger than mine, 2 hoopings is all my quilt needs, but if your quilt is larger, you just continue this process of creating new vertical and horizontal lines across the quilt until your quilt top is done.
Thank you for watching today's video. I hope that you're inspired and able to use this technique in a future quilty project. Until next time, happy sewing!